Some people whisper because they're shy, others because the truth is too heavy to say aloud. Elara never needed to be told she was invisible. The world made that clear without words. She moved through her days like breath through glass, present but never seen. At 17, she was the girl in the last seat of the last row, the one whose name teachers stumbled over when forced to take attendance, the one who didn't raise her hand, not because she didn't know the answers, but because she'd long stopped believing anyone wanted to hear her voice. She lived in silence, not just in sound, but in presence, a kind of stillness that wrapped around her like fog. Morning routines passed in muted patterns, a half-eaten piece of toast, her fingers trailing the condensation on the window pane, the soft shuffle of socks across a cold kitchen floor. Her parents barely spoke to each other, and even less to her. A half-closed door was her closest companion. At school, the corridors buzzed with the white noise of teenage life. Laughter, footsteps, gossip flung like pebbles. But Elara was untouched by it all. She didn't walk so much as glide, her eyes trained on the ground, her hands always clutching the strap of her worn canvas backpack like it was an anchor. She never made a sound when she entered or exited a room. No one ever noticed when she did. She wasn't shy in the way that made people endearing. She didn't have the cute kind of awkwardness that drew people in. Hers was a silence that made others uncomfortable, like she knew something they didn't, like she'd seen too much for someone her age. There were whispers, of course, not hers but about her. Is she mute? I heard she used to talk, but something happened. No, she's just weird. They didn't know that silence had once saved her. They didn't know it had once swallowed a scream. Elara had a sister once, older by 3 years. Laughter used to fill their room. Music used to echo off the walls. Then one day it didn't. Her sister left, in a way that no one ever fully explained. Just an absence, just a note. Since then, silence wasn't just a state, it was a tomb. Teachers stopped calling on her, friends stopped trying, and slowly Elara disappeared in plain sight. But silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it holds the loudest things. One Thursday afternoon, late autumn sunlight spilling through the windows, like honey, something unusual happened. A new English teacher, Mr. Rowe, thin-framed, sharp-eyed, flipped through his attendance sheet and paused. "Elara Wynne?" he called out, uncertain. The class turned as if reminded she existed. A few snickered. Elara looked up slowly, her gaze catching his. For the briefest moment, her eyes met his with startling clarity. Not fear, not confusion, just presence. She nodded once, and then, almost imperceptibly, the corners of her mouth lifted. A smile, tiny, fleeting, gone before anyone else could register it. But something shifted. Something had awakened. On Monday, there was a new name on the roll sheet. Nico Varon, transferred mid-semester. No introduction, no fanfare. Just a new presence that barely disturbed the dust in the room. He walked in with his head low, the hood of his gray sweatshirt pulled tight over a face framed by shaggy dark hair and bruised silence. He didn't make eye contact, didn't ask for help. When Mr. Rowe pointed toward the empty seat, the one next to Elara, he simply nodded and made his way over. No one protested. That corner of the room might as well have been forgotten by everyone but the spiders. He sat down, one chair away from her. At first, Elara didn't look at him. She was used to being ignored, and she had learned to return the favor. But there was something about the way he sat, not slouched or relaxed, but coiled, like someone who had been taught the hard way to make himself small. Days passed. He never spoke in class, but he wasn't fidgety or distracted like the others. Instead, he watched things, not just the teacher, but the way chalk dust settled on the ledge of the blackboard or how sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds. There was a kind of stillness in him that didn't come from peace. It came from being locked inside something deeper, familiar. On Wednesday, her pencil rolled off her desk during a lecture on Shakespeare's tragedies. It hit the floor and skittered toward his feet. Without a word, he bent down, picked it up, and held it out to her. Their fingers almost touched. Just the barest brush of skin against skin. She looked up. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but his eyes, quiet, amber-colored, rimmed with exhaustion, met hers and didn't look away. It wasn't the stare that shook her. It was the fact that he saw her, not through her, not past her, into her, like he recognized something inside that no one else had ever dared to name. The moment passed. He returned to his notebook. She turned back to her own. But that night, Ilara lay in bed and stared at her ceiling, tracing shapes in the cracks of peeling paint. Her chest felt unsettled, not heavy, not light, just awake, as if something inside her had been knocked gently, stirred from long slumber. The next day, in the middle of a dreary third-period lecture, she caught a glimpse of his notebook. He had scribbled something in the corner in thin, slanted handwriting. "Silence is not emptiness. It's where truth waits." She read it 3 times, then looked away, heart thudding for reasons she didn't understand. It wasn't meant for her, but it reached her anyway. And just like that, something cracked open inside her. Not broken, just unsealed. The beginning. It began with a book, a worn paperback copy of The Bell Jar, its spine cracked and annotated with tiny scribbles. One morning, Ilara noticed it sitting on the edge of Nico's desk. When he left for lunch, she lingered, eyes fixed on the title. And then, without fully knowing why, she slipped a page of her own poetry between its back cover and last chapter. Folded like a secret. The next day, she found the same book on her desk. He had underlined a line in pencil. "I took a deep breath and listened to the old brag of my heart. I am, I am, I am." Beneath it, in his narrow handwriting, "You still are." They never spoke, not with voices, but they began to write. Notes folded like wings, exchanged between classes. Sometimes whole pages, sometimes single lines left tucked beneath her bag or slid into his locker. They began sharing books, poetry, mythology, old novels with underlined heartbreaks. Ilara's fingers brushed against the margins where he had written small thoughts, as though reading his heartbeat in ink. To everyone else, they remained the quiet ones. Nobody noticed the tether forming between their silences. But in that space where words were fragile, a language formed. Not of speech, but of recognition. One afternoon, tucked into her notebook, she found a question scrawled in delicate script. "What are you most afraid of?" She stared at it for a long time, folded the note once, twice, didn't answer. Not yet. Later that week, he passed her a single page from his sketch pad. No words, just charcoal and paper. It was a girl, high in a tower, her face hidden in shadows. Around the tower, birds circled. Crows, maybe. Not flying away, but staying, watching, guarding. She didn't ask what it meant. She didn't need to. The next day, she slipped him a short poem she had written years ago, in the days when grief still bled from her fingertips. "The sky was too wide, so I built walls with silence. But sometimes birds still find me." When he read it, he didn't look at her, but his hand paused on the paper for a long time before folding it carefully into his notebook, like it was something living. One afternoon, school ended under soft gray clouds. Ilara wandered to the old sycamore near the edge of the schoolyard, a tree no one paid attention to. She sat beneath it, legs crossed in the dirt. A few minutes later, Nico joined her without a word. They sat like that for a long time, not touching, not speaking, just breathing in the same quiet. And then, without looking at him, Ilara spoke her first word to him. Not a sentence, not an explanation, just 5 soft syllables, barely louder than the wind. "I used to sing." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence around them rippled, softened, shifted. And for the first time, the quiet wasn't heavy. It was shared. Whispers returned to the classroom. But now they carried names. Ilara, spoken like a curse. And then, almost with laughter, Nico's little ghost. The popular crowd took notice. They always did. Not out of curiosity, but boredom. One boy, Mason, sharp-jawed and hungry for dominance, leaned across his desk one day and sneered just loud enough. "Careful, man. You keep hanging out with a mute girl, you'll forget how to talk yourself." The others laughed. Nico didn't. but something inside him stiffened. At first he shrugged it off, kept exchanging notes, kept walking just a little slower when Alara was nearby. But cracks formed, not in his affection, but in his armor. Rumors swirled like rot, that Alara was obsessed with him, that she had followed him home, that she was cursed, cursed, cursed. The kind of girl who dragged others down with her. It didn't take much for teenagers to turn pain into sport. Alara noticed the shift. It came in the pauses, in the way Nico hesitated before sliding a book to her, in the silence between classes, heavier now, no longer warm but laced with distance. Then came the comment that cemented it. Mr. Walker, the chemistry teacher, bitter, careless, had paused Nico one afternoon after lab. "You're a smart kid," he said, flipping through Nico's worksheet. "Don't waste time with that girl. People like her, they stay stuck. You're not like that, are you?" Nico didn't respond. But that night, he didn't return her note. The next day, he didn't look at her, and by the end of the week, he had stopped sitting by the old tree. Alara said nothing. What could she say? She had always been easy to leave. She didn't cry. She didn't chase him down the halls. She just folded inward. At home, the walls were thin and the noise was louder than usual. Her mother's glass shattered on the kitchen tile. Her father slammed the back door hard enough to rattle the windows. The television blared. Nobody noticed she hadn't eaten. Nobody asked why she hadn't spoken a full sentence in 3 days. They never did. She sat in her room, beneath the dim yellow glow of her bedside lamp, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror above her dresser. She opened her mouth, tried to speak. Nothing came out. Because the truth was, Alara's voice had been stolen long before Nico. Long before the teasing, her silence was old, ancient. It came from a house that never listened, a sister that never came back, and a heart that learned early that words only made you vulnerable. She thought she'd found a voice in the quiet between her and Nico, thought she'd been heard, but now, the silence was no longer shared. It was back to being a cage, and once again the world moved on, without ever hearing her. Nico was no longer sitting in the back, not next to her, not even near. He had moved forward, toward the noise, toward the warmth of laughter that didn't reach the eyes, toward the ones who used to mock him. Now they slapped his back, tossed casual smiles, let him orbit their world like a stray finally tamed. Alara watched from behind the veil of her own quiet, her desk now colder, the space beside her a hollow wound. He hadn't returned her last note, a single line she had written in careful script. "Does it hurt you too?" Folded with hope, slipped into the seam of his locker, left unanswered. Each day stretched like a bruise. She saw him in the hallway talking to Mason, nodding along, smiling in that way that didn't quite touch his mouth. A girl named Casey, all perfume and cruel curiosity, started lingering near him. One afternoon, Alara walked past just as Casey leaned in, whispered something in his ear. He laughed, not loudly, not freely, but he laughed. And Alara felt something inside her splinter, a soundless shattering that reached all the way back to the girl she used to be. Before grief, before silence. Rain came that day, sudden and unrepentant. The kind that soaked through layers, made the sky feel like it was pressing too close. She didn't have an umbrella. She didn't run. She walked, past the blinking streetlights, past the corner store where she used to buy candy with her sister, past the hollow houses with flickering televisions and shadows moving behind curtains. She walked until her socks were soaked, until her fingertips went numb, until she couldn't tell if her skin was wet from the rain or from the ache pouring out of her. When she got home, no one noticed she was drenched. The television was too loud, her mother too lost in a bottle. Her father's voice boomed from behind a slammed door. The same cycle, the same storm. In the solitude of her room, she reached into the back of her closet and pulled out a small dust-covered box, wooden with a faded flower carved into the lid. She hadn't touched it in years. The music box. Her sister had given it to her the week before she disappeared. "Alara," she had said back then, kneeling beside her, "when you're scared, play this. It'll help you remember who you are." With trembling fingers, Alara turned the key. A slow melody spilled into the air. Soft, broken, familiar. It once comforted her, once reminded her of warm hands and laughter in the dark. Now it echoed in the hollow of her chest. Each note felt like a farewell. She curled up on her bed, damp clothes clinging to her skin, and let the music play until the final note faded into silence. And then, to no one at all, she whispered, "I'm tired of being no one." The room didn't answer. The world didn't pause. Only silence replied. The regular teacher was out sick. The substitute arrived mid-morning. An older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun, wearing mismatched earrings and a velvet shawl that whispered when she moved. The class barely noticed her. Most substitutes blurred together, but she noticed everything, especially Alara. Near the end of the period, as papers shuffled and chairs scraped, the woman passed by Alara's desk, paused and spoke softly, almost like a secret meant only for her. "You have the quiet strength," she said, voice warm but edged with gravity, "of someone who knows too much." Alara looked up, startled. The woman only smiled gently, then walked on. It wasn't flattery, it wasn't pity, it was recognition. That night, under the dim light of her bedside lamp, Alara reached into the drawer she had avoided for years. Beneath yellowing pages and forgotten pens lay an envelope, soft at the edges, sealed in her sister's handwriting. She had never opened it, couldn't, until now. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The paper inside was creased and warm with memory. The letter didn't explain where her sister went, didn't offer apologies or stories or closure. It was simply love. And one line that felt like it had waited all this time just for now. "Don't let your silence become your prison." Alara didn't cry quietly. Not this time. The sobs came from deep inside, the kind that pull from years of swallowed words, buried grief, and aching truths that never had a voice. She cried until her throat burned, until her chest ached, until the silence that had ruled her life began to crack. And in that breaking, something shifted. Not healed, but opened. The next morning, she dressed slowly, tied her hair back, folded the letter once, then placed it in her pocket. Before leaving, she opened her closet and pulled the old music box from the shelf. It was cold in her hands, but it no longer felt like a wound. At school, Nico was already in class, bent over his notebook. His friends were buzzing around him like flies around light, but he didn't seem to be laughing today. Alara didn't speak. She walked to his desk. Gently, she placed the music box there. No note, no explanation, just that, a symbol of what once was, of what still lived inside her, of something broken maybe, but still beautiful. Then she walked away, her footsteps soft but sure. That afternoon, she opened a new notebook. Not for passing notes, not for being seen. She began to write again. Poems, truths, questions without answers. Memories turned into stanzas, grief unwrapped, shaped into syllables. The words were not for him, they were for her, and for the first time they felt like a beginning. Weeks passed. The seat beside Alara stayed empty. The whispers had moved on to other things. New drama, fresh cruelty. Nico's name had vanished from their mouths as though he'd never been part of the story at all. But Alara noticed. Every day, the empty chair, the hollow space where he once sat, the way her eyes drifted toward the door just before the bell, hoping. Nothing. And then one gray morning, thick with fog, he returned. He looked different. Not just thinner, though he was. Not just tired, though the purple beneath his eyes told stories of sleepless nights. It was something else. A quiet that didn't match the old one. A silence deeper, heavier. He kept his head low in class, didn't speak. But after the bell rang and the others spilled out into the hallway like restless birds, Nico remained behind. So did Alara. She hadn't planned to. Her feet simply refused to move. The room emptied. The hum of the school faded, and he walked over, slow, hesitant, and sat beside her once more. The air between them was delicate, as if the wrong word might break it. Then finally his voice came, not loud, but real. "I didn't know how to protect you," he said, eyes fixed on his hands, "from what I couldn't protect myself from." His throat tightened. She saw it, then softer, almost inaudible. I was going to leave. Ilara's breath caught. Nico reached into his bag and pulled out the worn notebook, the same one he used to scribble thoughts in the corners of, the one she had once seen carry poetry, sketches, fragments of truth. He opened to a page, creased, raw. Words scrawled in rushed ink, a goodbye, a letter to no one, or maybe to the silence, maybe to her. Some people go not because they want to, but because staying feels like screaming with no sound. I was ready to disappear. But then, I found your poem, the one about the tower, the birds circling, and I realized, maybe someone else knows what it's like. Maybe I'm not alone. And that was enough. He turned to her then, not smiling, just present, alive. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the music box, carefully like it was something sacred. I kept it with me, he said, placing it on the desk. It reminded me of something soft, something worth staying for. Then with slow fingers, he wound the key. The melody filled the space, cracked and lovely. And Ilara, quiet Ilara, invisible Ilara, did something she hadn't done in years. She leaned forward, met his eyes and whispered, just loud enough to be heard, stay. One word. But it wasn't just a word. It was a thread pulled tight between them, a note held long and trembling, a call across the distance that said, I see you. I still do. And in that fragile moment, her whisper became more than sound. It became a song of return, of survival, of two broken voices finding harmony in each other's silence. Nico stayed, not just in school, but in her world. There were no grand gestures, no sudden rise in popularity, no dramatic apologies from classmates or confessions under the bleachers. Life didn't transform overnight, but it shifted, quietly, gently, like the way light slips into a room without asking. They still sat near the back, still spoke in glances more than sentences. But the silence between them no longer ached. It hummed with understanding, with presence. In time, Ilara joined the school's poetry club, not because someone pushed her, but because she found she had something to say. The first time she read aloud, her voice trembled like paper in the wind, hands shaking, eyes flickering to the door every few seconds, ready to run. But she stayed and read. A poem about rain that felt like grief. A girl with no name who planted seeds in a cracked heart and waited for spring. When she finished, no one clapped at first. Then someone whispered, wow. And someone else said, that was beautiful. And she realized they had heard her. Not just the poem, her. After that, more students joined the club. Not all quiet, but many were. Some spoke of things they'd never shared before. Shame, sorrow, healing. The silence that followed each reading became sacred, because it meant listening. Nico sat in the back of every session, sketching while she read. Sometimes he'd slip her a drawing afterward, a hand holding a flower, a window with light spilling through. Their own secret applause. They never needed to say much. One whisper had been enough, because sometimes a whisper is the start of something unstoppable. Some girls bloom like fire. Ilara bloomed like dawn, slow, software, and impossible to ignore. And when she whispered that day, when she leaned forward and asked him to stay, everything changed. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. If this story touched your heart, comment, I felt it.